We're learning Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah, and the Rambam begins Echad Matzah Shenefes, both matzah that is baked. We go to the Peirush Matzah Shenefes Betano. It doesn't matter whether the matzah was baked in a tano, a bilfis, or in a pot, or ben shid become betzek by ilfis. Even in the pot, it doesn't matter if it was stuck to the pot before v'akach yilsiach, afterwards he heated up the pot. Or ben siach, first he heated it up the pot, and then he attached it. I feel offer bekarka, even if he baked it on hot ground. All of it's, you're always yoitze, because that it bakes it. The Machon Nesher cites this as Rabbi Yochanan in Sukka 37a, that when you have it in this type of tano, which is a pot-like item, it doesn't matter whether you heat it up first and then you attach the dough, or you attach the dough and then you heated it up. It's always considered bread, and you're chayiv in the challah. That's regarding challah, and you also fulfill your obligation on the Pesach. And so the Riv Paskins, the Rambam, by the shiur of challah, and the Rashba agrees, and the Ramban. In Agos Maimonides, they cite that the Rebbe HaTosfos explains that the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan, because in Yevomis, Rova says all the shas whenever there's a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, halacha like Rabbi Yochanan, except for three things. Since he doesn't mention here that halacha is like Reish Lakish, therefore the rule would seem to be that halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan, not like, and Rabbi Yochanan though paskins like Reish Lakish. Why is that? If the rule is Rabbi Yochanan have Reish Lakish, the halacha is like Reish Lakish, because there's one sugya in Psochim which elaborates on Reish Lakish, and whenever the Gemara elaborates on a certain individual, the halacha is according to him. The Ravid now disagrees with the Rambam, and he says Maise Ilfis, what's in a pot, Aval Gav the Lechem Have, even though it is bread, one has to be careful that it might become chometz. Why? You have to worry about it. Only if you made it in this type of oven, which is in a pot-like shape, and he put on it the cover, and therefore he heated it up before he put the matzah in the dough of the matzah into the pot. The Nafkalon, we learned this from Milsad Abayim in Psochim Mem 40a, that one should not. Rabbi says one should not bake or broil on the fire 2 grains of wheat together, because the water will transfer from one to the other and make the other one chometz. The Rabba disagrees. By what? When you are roasting 2 grains. Also, these are the 3 areas where they disagree, 3 different types of situations where you have to worry about if the water will transfer from one grain to the other, or from one end of the pot to the other. The Maidepolit Mehai ratio, because if you, according to Abaya, Rava says to him, if you're going to worry about grains from one to the other, you should also worry about the water that goes from one end of the grain to the other. Bola Bahai ratio machmitz, and it causes chometz. And Rabbatoyin, Rabbi argues that if we'll worry about by 2 grains, even by 1 you have to worry about it, because through the roasting it will pull out the water and it will go from one end to the other. But Rabbi says Peirush Ninu. Now here the gears of Rav and Rabbi is mixed up in the Gemara, and in many places we'll leave it with Rabbi. And Rabbi says Peirush, the water coming out of the grain is Peirush, and we have a rule that Peirush ain't a machmitzim, that Peirush do not cause chometz. In conclusion, the Gemara says that Abai himself agreed that the water coming out from one end to the other definitely will not cause chometz, and he brings a raya proof of it from when you dry grains in a tanur. We learned in Perek Hay that you can roast the grains if they're dry in fire, or put them in a pot, and you put the pot into the tano, so they should dry out, and they should remain eligible to be eaten. We'll turn to the next page. But that's only when the water that comes out can flow out, because the pot is placed in such a way that if anything does collect, it will go out, and therefore it doesn't go into the wheat, even though the wheat was wet, and it's going to exude the water. But if the cod is standing in a situation that the water is going to gather in the bottom, then obviously it's like cooking it in a soup, and therefore it will become chametz. And Rabbi disagrees that even when it's standing up, it's permitted to use the grains, because it's peirush. Even if it did come out and it was soaked in it, it's peirush. It doesn't cause chametz. Fruit juice does not activate chametz. The Magen Mishnah explains that the Ravid is going with the opinion that even though that Rabbis is of the opinion that peirush do not cause chametz, and that's the way we rule, still, when we talk about a dough, Rabbi too will admit it's forbidden, because the dough has some water, and the water will come out from one side and will go to the other side to become, because when you make the dough, and therefore the Ravid says that you can only do it if you do it in a pot that's heated up and it's covered, and therefore I guess it instantaneously or right away bakes, rather than having time for the water to come out and go back in. Magen Mishnah says we don't find anyone who worries about this water, and he says the Ravid's proof from the Gemara is because by grains you're seeing that when you put the grains on the fire, or or however you roast them, that water does come out. And Abai was afraid that he's of the opinion that the fruit juices do cause chametz, and Rabbi disagrees, since he is of the opinion that fruit juices do not cause chametz. Therefore, you don't have to worry about it. But a dough that was made out of flour and water, even before it's able to be baked, you do not fulfill your obligation if we have to worry about water coming out and causing the dough to become chametz. The Beis Yosef cites that there are those who were fearful of the Ravid's opinion and who disagrees with the Rambam, and the Rashba in the Tshuva says one should be careful because the Ravid said it, even though other Rishonim disagree. Now, halacha l'maisa in the Shulchan Aruch we find the halacha. You have to roast it, heat it up, rather the pot, before you place in it the dough. Bein tano, bein kuvia. It doesn't matter whether it's a tano or this pot. Or kuvia is also a type of shingle that you put on, made out of ceramics, that you put on your roof, that they used to use to also bake on. Or whether it's in a pot without water, because if it has water, if he puts in the dough when the water is cooking, it's not called baking, but it's rather either cooking or halito. The halito means instantaneous boiling. That's forbidden for matzah. Bein bekarka, or if you baked it on the ground. So the Mechaber says you can do it on the ground, but to place it in the pot and then to heat up the pot, there are those who forbid it, and we should be careful. And that's regarding all vessels, like we find in the Torah in Siman 461, who says this rule should be in your hands. Whatever you heat up underneath it or on top of it, and afterwards you put on it the dough, then it will not become chametz. But if you attach it first and then you heat it up, then you've got a problem. It could be chametz. The Mishnah Berurah even says the name of the poskim that even if you inadvertently put it on, attack, and then heat it up, one should not eat it, if that's possible, because he's fearful of those who believe that one has to be careful, be afraid it might be chometz. And he cites Sifkot Yud from the Gra that Loshen HaMachaber Yesh Oisrim means to begin with. And Mishnah Berurah adds, only if he did not leave it there for the amount of a mil, which is basically a mile, 18 minutes, till he begins baking it. Because otherwise we have a rule that if it's more than a mile, it became chometz. That's only, and also is only if you baked it without water or any other juice. Because if it's done with juices, so then you have a problem of matzah shiro. If you baked it with fruit juices, it becomes matzah shiro. Yeah, the Magid Mishnah about if he baked the matzah on karka, cites the Makor that is yotze from Brochus Lamed Chesed and Aleph 38a. Mazutra made a suda on that which was baked on the ground. Beis Yosef on the Tur in 461 writes, you can be yotze, you fulfill your obligation with matzah which is baked on ground. It means the Gemara. Kuva the Adam Yotze Bo Yedei Pesach. What's the reason? Because it's called lechamoini. Obviously, if you don't even have an oven, you're baking it on baking the hot sands, like the Riv and the Rosh say. That if you bake matzah on ground, and you made sure it didn't become chometz, he's Yotze Yedei Chavosei. Halacha l'maaseh, Shulchan Aruch paskins, and even if he didn't bake it in the ground, he fulfills his obligation. The Mishnah Berurah says in Sifkot and Tez that this is called tulkenin, which is brought la halacha. You can make a moitzi if you establish your suda on it. Like in the Gemara, the Mansutra made a suda on tulkenin that was baked on the ground, and he made a moitzi. And there he explains in the Gemara that you fulfill your obligation of matzah pesach because it's called lechem oini. Matzah, which was not baked totally. The Rambam continues, if it was not totally baked, even though people don't use it today, it's soft, it seems to bend, as long as there aren't strings of dough that come with it, when he breaks it. And therefore the Magid Mishnah says, this is found in the Bryce in Psachim 38a, Tani, we learned you yotze with this matzah which is soft, that is not totally baked. What's called soft? Again, anything that doesn't have strings of dough pulling with it when you break it. Halacha l'maaseh in the Shulchan Aruch the paskins matzah that was baked to the point that if you break it, there are no strings attached, as you might say, coming from it. It's okay. Now the Mishnah Berurah writes that this siman is only when it's hot. When it became cold, it doesn't prove anything. Therefore, it's not. A person has to be careful. He shouldn't rely on this himself. He should ask him who knows how to decide this issue. Now, matzah shchuya. Matzah, which after it was baked, was then soaked in water. But it's not talking about where it is literally like liquid. Matzah shebishlo, in water, totally after he cooked it, you're not any yotze bo yedei chavosei b'achilosa. You're not yotze the choyve sharei ein bo tam pas, because it doesn't have the taste of bread. I will go to the next page. Now the Magid Mishnah cites the brisa. Yotze in a bread which was soaked and cooked, which did not come apart. Rae Gann Family. He says that he disagrees. He says only if it was soaked but not cooked. The Riv paskins, if it was soaked and not cooked, even though it is, even if it was cooked, not to a point where it falls apart, because you need tam matzah and you don't have it. The Gemara, we say that when there's an agreement between Rabbi Yosef and Meir, Halacha Rabbi Yosef. Now, we mentioned earlier that there's many Hilchos HaChasidim that they don't eat matzah which is soaked, and they're reasoning. But it seems here from here that it would be possible to soak matzah after it's cooked. Rashi explained that when you soak the bread, the matzah, in like a soup or in wine after it's baked, even though it falls apart, it's called a bread, or as long as it hasn't totally fallen apart. But Manoach mentions that's arrived only in water, but not by wine or other drinks, because maybe water doesn't take away the taste of the matzah, whereas these other items have their own taste and they take away the taste of matzah. Manoach cites from the Mishnah Sochem 40b and the Gemara Sochem 41a by Korban Pesach. Even though that water does not take away the taste of the korban, the meat, still you can't cook it. In water, certainly not in something else which does take away the taste. So we see that liquids have the ability to nullify a taste. However, water is not the same because it has no taste. And even there, though by Korban Pesach it's talking about cooking, you can say that soaking it is like cooking it, like the Rae Gann says. That if you soak it in wine or other drinks, you're not yotze. But if you put it in water and it didn't take apart, then it would be okay, and that would seem to be the opinion of the Rambam. And even though the Rambam says that you fulfill your obligation with bread which is soaked, it doesn't make a difference between water to other drinks, still in Halacha Yudi says by a sick person or older person that he can't eat, that you can soak it in water and you give it to him, and as long as it didn't fall apart. So it would seem that by other liquids one should not do so. Maybe it'll taste the taste of the matzah. So Rabbeinu Manoach says you can, however, dip the matzah in juice as long as you don't soak it. Just like on Pesach, after it's been roasted, you can dip it in liquids. Mustard, for a fact, that you can make mustard without being homestic, or ketchup or anything else, and you don't have to worry that it'll change the taste. Now, in our sugya, the Maggid Mishnah explains, we're talking about matzah that was cooked and did not become apart. Meir says you fulfill your obligation. Arezi says it's called cooked. You don't fulfill your obligations. According to the Rambam, you only fulfill your obligations if it did not become so soaked that it's falling apart. And the Rambam is of the opinion that even if you soak it, you're not yotze as long as if it's falling apart. Halacha Yudi writes, you give them to eat as long as it does not fall apart. That if it's soaked, you can give it to a zokain, an elderly person, or a sick person, only if it hasn't come apart. The Gemara explains in Siman 461, if it didn't become apart, it's talking even about soaking it. And he brings proof from the Gemara in Sochem 35a that if a person soaked water until it becomes a liquid and he drank it, you're not yotze, you don't fulfill your obligation of eating a kazayas, because this is not called eating. Rabbeinu Manoach points out from this that matzah that was cooked, you're not yotze yidecha, you can't fulfill your obligation because it has no taste of bread. That's we see that even if it was cooked in water and not in other liquids, the very cooking after if it was baked, it takes away from it the concept of bread. Because for fulfill your obligation, you need the taste of matzah. And we learned that in 6.2 that if you swallowed it, that you don't need to taste it. So what's the difference? Or you swallowed more, he's not yotze, because there you do need to taste it. So why, when he cooks it and it has no taste, he's taking his body, is absorbing it. And he answers, if he swallowed the matzah, if he wanted to, he could have had a taste. But when he put something in his mouth that you can't taste it, you're not yoitze. And he recites Hilchos Gedolos that explains that you don't fulfill your obligation where it's cooked because it's considered matzah shiur, and not because it doesn't have a taste of matzah. Halacha l'maaseh. In Shulchan Aruch paskins, a person can be yoitze the matzah shchuya if it's soaked, as long as it doesn't fall apart. But if it cooked it, you're not yoitze. You don't fulfill your obligations. And the Mishnah Berurah explains that which is cooked means water, and as far as soaking it, any juices or in any other liquids such as wine or juices of fruit or in soup, there are those who say it's forbidden because they take away the taste of the matzah and they put their own taste into it. And the Mishnah Berurah in Sharatzin says that this is indicated from the language of the Rif in the Rosh, but they write only if it's soaked in water, but not in other liquids. And he cites further that the Beis Meir says that it could be that they said water, that even water is also usur, not for the purpose of telling us that only water by soaking it. And he brings Rae Gann that the Rae is machmir, is stringent, and he asks why should this be different from a dough that was rolled together with oil and honey. There too you have the taste of honey and wine in the bread, more so than soaking it in wine. And still a smuta, and you fulfill it. You would fulfill your obligation with the other bread. The only reason you can't is because it's called that matzah shiur, not lechem oini. So you must say that only when you cook it does it lose its taste, because the cooking adds a taste. But the majority of the taste when you bake it is bread or matzah. Therefore, you fulfill your obligation. And what it says in the Gemara, that Rabbeinu Menach cites that by other mashkin to take away the taste, it means that it's no different than cooking in water. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't have a name of matzah, because you'll taste in it also the taste of wine, because that's no worse than having baked it to begin with honey. We have the taste of honey as well. So what's the opinion of the Rae? He is according it with what we learn in Psochim 115a, that you shouldn't put together matzah and mora together. Even matzah and mora. Why? Because mora, the bitterness will be nullifies the taste of matzah. Here too, maybe the wine will nullify the taste of matzah. And it's not similar to what was baked in honey, because it was baked before, it was mixed before it was baked, and everything together causes the bread, and therefore it's called a bread which has different tastes in it. But here, after you finish baking it, then when you put something else in it, you're nullifying the taste that it had. The Rae is the opinion you have to be afraid that the tampas was lost. In the Halacha, Rashi says, matzah, even though it fell apart, as long as it hasn't fallen apart completely. Now it's very, very soft. As long as it's not literally liquid, you can fulfill your obligation. It would seem that the Bach says so la'alocha, and so it would seem from the Bir Agro. But from the Beis Yosef, it would seem that even if it didn't get to that point of literally being water, as long as it's falling apart, it's not eligible to be matzah. What the Gemara says, he swallowed it. How do you say if it's not liquid, how can you swallow it? To tell us that by chometz in that situation, then you are chayiv. Even though matzah you're not yotzeh, but chometz, if someone has a shalom ate it on Pesach, in that situation you're chayiv. Because even though the Pasuk Nefesh tells us even if we drink it, you're over. Therefore, if it didn't come apart, we have to be machmir even when it didn't get to that point of actually drinking it, it's called mimuach, and you don't fulfill your obligation. Mishabura says la halacha, that if he cooked it, he doesn't fulfill his obligation, even if he has in each of the pieces of the matzah a whole kezayis. And there's a toar of lechem oleo, because after the bishul, then the taste of matzah has been nullified from it. And he cites that the achronim write, not only cooking it, but even if you soak it in hot boiling water, and even if it's in a kli sheni, which means not on the fire directly, but rather in a soup bowl, if it's boiling hot, you should be stringent not to leave it there while the item is still boiling. Boiling means hot enough for the hand to be burnt in it, but for a child's hand to be burnt in it. But if unless it's an older person who can't eat it otherwise, and only with water. But in soup itself, you have to be careful because of the taste of matzah, as we'll see in Halacha Yud.